All right. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Saurabh Gupta, and I'm joined today by Velu Palani and all of you guys here. I appreciate your time. We wanted to talk about getting buy-in for your Salesforce Enterprise Data Strategy. It's a topic very near and dear to mine and Velu's hearts, and we've kind of run into this in multiple places. So let's get on with it. Moving on, we'll start with the equivalent of a safe harbor. I've gotten that inspiration from Salesforce, where I used to work. So this is a disclaimer. This is more about strategy and communication, but we do talk sometimes about data security and privacy, but any of this is not legal advice, obviously. This is just mostly our point of view and just for informational purposes. So with that, 30 seconds on me. My name is Saurabh Gupta. I am the co-founder and CEO of Cloud Compliance. I'm based in Chicago, spent about 7 years at Salesforce, an enterprise architect by trade. I blog quite a bit at LinkedIn, so you can reach out to me there. And that's really about me. Another 15 seconds on my company. We are an AppExchange ISV partner. We are specifically focused on data privacy and security. Our claim to fame is that we are 100% on platform. Our apps are all designed for large and complex Salesforce orgs. And we can go live in weeks. You can go live in weeks with our apps. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Velu.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name is Velu Palani. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. I work for a company called HCSC. It's a healthcare services corporation. We are part of Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. And I also ran crmcoe.com. Basically a group of experts voluntarily sharing of best practices and the tools available in the CRM platform. And then I have about 20 years of experience in the Salesforce. I started using Salesforce in 2000, so I haven't done anything outside of Salesforce for the last 20 years. So having said that, let's move on, and thank you again for joining.
All right. I'm actually going to mute the audience just so that there's no background noise. If only I can find where that mute button is. Sorry, bear with me just a minute. All right, I'm gonna guess that means I'm just gonna go on. My apologies. All right, so the next slide. So really, the intention of us getting into this conversation was that, we spent a lot of time talking about how CRM data strategy and CRM at large and Salesforce in particular, how a lot of it gets maybe funded at times, but do people really get it? And we wanted to talk about some of the narratives and some of the artifacts that we have found very useful. I noticed there is a couple of familiar folks here on the call who would probably see this resonating with them very strongly. In particular, I noticed Jonathan is on the call, one of my colleagues from Salesforce, and some of the artifacts I'm going to show, he can also talk about it. So anyway, getting into this, fundamentally, the idea is that we are living in a data economy, right? Like every product, every service, every offering, every business, every industry, profit, non-profit, it doesn't matter. Across the board, data is driving our experiences, and we expect no less as customers, as consumers, as benefactors of any of these things. And what's really interesting is that customer data fuels everything, right? Like we see this trend where our relationship as individuals and our relationship as business with customer data has evolved in the last, couple of decades. We used to be about transactions in the 70s and the 80s, right? If you were around at that time, we were just putting stuff on mainframes, and maybe, you call somewhere, they pull up and see a bunch of transactions. And from that, with the advent of CRMs in the 90s with Siebel, and then eventually with Salesforce and some of the other ones, we moved on from transactions to relationships. We started understanding our customers better at scale with systems and technology. We would know what someone's sports are, what particular football team do they endorse, and their dog's name, their spouse's name, so on and so forth. And that richness started reflecting in our sales, in our service, in our various interactions with our customers. And from there, we've kind of moved into engagement. And here engagement refers to really bringing in the social component and engaging with our customers across various channels. So we not only know about information that would be classic CRM in your Salesforce, but we are able to look at information from social media coming in, whether you're on LinkedIn or Twitter. We understand much more deeply about our customers, their preferences, their sort of directions that they're headed in. And from there, here we are in transformation world where we are bringing in even more data, right? So what you see is the CRM data strategy and CRM itself. Its value in the organization, its strategic impact has dramatically risen. And our transformation today includes data not only about our customer, but about their communication preferences, about their usage pattern, about the kind of product and services they're using, the amount of time they spend on websites, the kind of things they say on Twitter. So on one hand, you could talk about how scary it is, but on the other hand, you can also see how incredibly compelling it is to get a very, very rich data set that's coming in. So what we're going to talk about in the next few slides is a couple of things. One, we'll talk specifically about artifacts that we found useful for, for our stakeholders to build consensus, to sort of bring people who don't do CRM or Salesforce for a living, to bring them on board and have them understand why these things matter, why they should look at it more than just cutting a check for the senior execs, and why business owners, whether you don't directly see yourself involved, why do you still need to understand and help support and buy into these kind of strategies? So if you're someone in finance, HR, some very some internal system or operation where you may not necessarily be talking to customers every day, as in, which you see more with sales, service, marketing, but still, why do you need to be part of this? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Velu and mute a few people here. Go ahead, Velu.
Thank you, Saurabh. As you see here, I started my career in early 90s or maybe mid of 90s. At that time, in fact, when I started with mainframe. So I even never understood that we would have the data explosion of how we capture the data, how we create it, and how we copy in multiple systems and so on and so forth. In next 2 years, by 2025, I was doing some research about CRM data and how the growth of the data is about 180 zettabytes of data that we are going to be capturing globally. So you just go figure out, do the math. I do not even comprehend what that 180 zettabytes of data that we are going to be dealing with. Out of which, this topic today is again about CRM data. How do you get the buy-in from your various stakeholders about the CRM data strategy? I've been in the ecosystem for many, many years. What I have noticed, every projects that I've been involved, CRM or a data strategy for CRM implementation is always secondary, in my opinion. So that's my experience. I would like to hear from folks here. It should be equal or greater when it comes to specifically designing the data strategy for your CRM applications. So that having the company that I work for, we have several orgs, multiple orgs, and we literally capture a lot of data. It's actually growing leaps and bounds. And can you imagine if you don't have a good strategy, what happens? That's what we will be discussing today. Saurabh, it's great to see that we are focused on the transformation today, but how many companies are ready to do that? That's what we will discuss.
Cool. Agreed. Thank you so much, Velu, for that. So let's talk a little bit about, data is very strategic. It can transform us and all of that, but does everyone get it? And, here are some interesting facts that I'll let Velu elaborate a little bit more. But the reality is, as we go through this, if you think about human psychology, right, we only support two kind of things. things that we understand or things that we trust, right? It has to either appeal to us logically and we understand and we go, okay, we get it and we can support it, or there's enough faith, enough trust, and we go, yeah, I don't maybe understand it, but I trust the people who are doing it and have faith that this is headed in the right direction and I can get behind it. And that's the key component as we go through the rest of this conversation. What you will see is that this is like, we need to break through these barriers, especially if you come from a technology background or you work in a CRM company, if you're in consulting and you come with the CRM perspective and you're talking to people who go, well, yeah, we have these tools, but I don't really know if I understand them enough. So Velu, do you want to shed a bit of light on some of these impacts?
Absolutely. This is something that as a leader of the COE that I lead for the company, the challenge, whether you lead the COE or whether you're responsible for it, the lack of executive support is a top 3 CRM risk factor. So whenever I talk to the execs, it's not about they don't want to give you the commitment or they don't want to give you the support. They don't understand the reason behind it. So it's very, very critical for us to help them to understand why their commitment is important. And especially on the middle side, you see the 18 to 69% CRM project failure rates. That's, to me, that's pretty staggering. And so platforms like Salesforce, let's say you are using Health Cloud or like any of the industries that Salesforce has today, if you are not able to leverage the platform to full extent or even to like 30%, 40%, I consider that project is not a success, because you just, like we all know, Salesforce will work. When you put some data, configure something, it'll work. But is that considered as a success? So that's where I see that 18 to 69%, the wide range, because companies do not see the benefit, the outcome that they are looking for. So wherever I worked, the first thing that I see, what is the business value? What is the business value that we are measuring? That's very important. That's considered as your success metrics. And finally, in my last 20 years of experience, I have re-implemented Salesforce in many organizations. Let's say you have, when I say re-implemented, they started with an implementation, they don't succeed, and then we go and re-implement. And some places that I've seen, companies, they cannot, Salesforce being a cloud system or any system, as a matter of fact, any CRM system, you build something, and if you cannot grow and you cannot scale to a wider audience in your organization, I consider that as a failure. You have to restart it. I have firsthand experience in re-implementing it or redesigning, restarting the project. So it's a very, very critical for us. If you are dealing with CRM applications, these are the things that we have to watch out. The main cause, or one of the main causes, is about the CRM data. So it's all about the data that you have. So it's just very critical for us to understand, have a good test strategy, which you will talk further.
Well said, very well said. It's all about the data. All right, so let's talk about that, right? The cost of data strategy is really become unaffordable. And there are two components, right? On one hand is all the strategic value you can get and transformation you can do and all the great stuff. But on the other hand, it's the fact that we can't afford anymore to not have a well thought through data strategy. And we can't afford for our organization to not understand and get behind it. And one of the areas, particularly, we see this firsthand because we do a lot of work in data privacy and security for Salesforce. It's got a direct impact on brand trust. It can erode it. You look at the amount of fines, the sort of distrust that we've, as consumers, we have with brands, whether it's giving your email address or giving additional information. You think about the kind of fines that regulators are putting. You see a trend here where it's no longer optional to sort of go and say, yeah, we don't really have a data strategy. We buy a bunch of tools and kind of just let it figure itself out. So I'm going to let Velu shed some more light on it before we move forward.
Yeah, it's just very interesting for any company, as you all know, what are the major functions that we are talking about are the core functions of an organization. It's all about sales, marketing, and service. And these are the major functions for any company. You exist because of your customer, and you sell to them, you market to them, and you obviously service them. That's how any business, that's the key. So, and these systems need good data. It's a common sense, we all know that. But can you imagine a company or an organization not having a thoughtful methodology in terms of managing your CRM data is what I am always shocked. Some companies, not all of them, they think about the CRM as more like a capability of the platform, put some processes so that they can run the business. But the data is very, very critical. And then 97% of customers are spooked that their data is misused. Even just having that fear of your customer having their data onto your system, and they completely trust you that you protect their data, and you are not only protecting the data, and you are serving them the way that they want to be served. So I think that's the major thing that we have to look at in terms of putting a strategy together. So this warrants, it's a clear strategy that you have to have. At the same time, the Gdpr fines, this is Gdpr, and I am sure now the laws are coming pretty fast. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the healthcare industry. We get a lot of compliance challenges that we have to make sure you're not only protecting your data and you are compliant with the local laws, at the same time, you are meeting the needs or the customer preference. In healthcare that we call it member. Every person who's insured with us, we call them as a member. We have to have the trust within the trust of the member that we have. So it's so important that you do have a good strategy. So Saurabh, this is whenever I look at it, 97%. That keeps me up in the night. Okay, is my data safe? Wherever you put it, and it's so amazing how easily companies hijack your data. Not easily, but they do hijack, and they ask for ransomware. So sometimes that I go through personally, or when I say personally, as a professionally, we need to make sure that everything that we do, first thing is trust your data. That's what we focus. So we'll continue to discuss about it.
True. I agree. And I think to Velu's point, right? Like this trend is only accelerating. US today does not have a federal privacy law, but there is a lot of lobbying in DC for that, right? Right now we have a bunch of state laws, CCPA, CPRA being the most notable. But what you're seeing again is, right, the strategic aspect that let's do this so that we get more out of our CRM, the data inside it, everything that surrounds it. So Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Pardot, or its new name, and whatever else is there. But in addition to that, the strategic value that you get out of data, it's also the other part of it, the loss aversion as an organization. We don't want to be fined. We don't want to be breached. We don't want our brand trust to be eroded. And that kind of leads us into the deeper aspect of it. Why are we failing, right? It's not for lack of spending money. I mean, you look at these companies, they're buying top of the line software, right? Like I've worked at Salesforce, I exclusively focus on Salesforce customers. That's the world's leading platform, right? And still we see customers struggling, to implement CRM systems to sort of evolve their data strategy. And you also look at some of these customers and they bring in really experienced SI partners. They bring in very experienced internal resources. And despite of all of that, we are seeing sort of challenges in how these things are moving forward. And those challenges, if you look at, the sort of the top 3 reasons why these projects are failing, right? Whether it's lack of executive commitment, whether it's poor data quality, whether it's lack of alignment with existing IT and infrastructure. If you boil it down quite simply, the key trend here is that you're seeing a lack of buy-in and a lack of CRM data strategy that's driving this. And what we want to do now is, in another slide or so, we will switch over and start talking about what we have seen is an effective way to counteract it. And to, how do we make sure that there is, sufficient buy-in and everyone gets it. So before we move on really quickly, Velu, do you want to add a little more context?
We all understand the poor data quality, lack of executive commitment. We just have to look at why this is happening. Why are we failing is one thing. And what is the reason why we don't get the commitment? And what is the reason that we have a poor data quality? Let's look at we are talking about in the context of CRM. We are not talking about an enterprise level data strategy. The scope is very limited to the CRM systems. So as you all know, that CRM systems, constantly the data is changing. What comes in and what you augment with your current data, and then what goes out,
right.
It's constantly changing. And it's a pretty much 24/7 systems that are producing data, augmenting and messing things up. So that is one way you look at it. But at the same time, how do we address this issue? In my opinion, in my experience, all starts with proper education and change management, specifically on the data itself. So do we have a good knowledge about your environment? Especially, what I have noticed at the places that I worked with, when you have multiple orgs, for example, Salesforce, when you have systems, are we duplicating the data across multiple orgs, or are we just sharing the information? How are we doing all these things? What statistics say that only 10% of that data that is captured globally is, across the board in an enterprise level is unique. 90% of them are duplicated or replicated. The same data lies into multiple areas or multiple applications. So can you imagine that 90% duplicates? I do not know whether it is I just went to the website, it's called statistics.org or .com. I was doing some research. 90% gets duplicated. So I think the important piece for all of us to understand why are we failing, I think it's because proper education and change management, that has to happen from the day one, especially for the CRM systems. So Saurabh, I think that's how I look at it, and that's very critical for any companies who is managing or implementing CRM systems.
I agree. So let's jump into what can we do to get more executives to buy into change management and education. How do we avoid this, right? How do we get a buy-in across all levels, almost all levels, I guess, and across functions?
Yeah.
How do you make sure that your non-tech departments, and everyone in the organization is buying in? And we've boiled it down to 3 areas that we want to dive a bit deeper into. The first is a trend. And the idea is, this is very similar to like the second slide where I was showing that our relationship with data is changing. So that is the intention of a trend, right? You look at a trend and you map it to your business vision and strategy. And we'll talk in a minute about the motivation of executives and when they're looking at this, how are they, trying to course correct and make sure their business strategy and vision is aligning with the trends from consumer perspective, governance, regulatory, marketing forces, other macroeconomic reasons to do it. The thing that's interesting about trends in general is it's kind of hard to argue with trends. You can debate facts and argue all day long about how they were collected, but trends people don't argue with that much. It is a trend that we want ourselves to be treated by every product and service much like how Amazon offers it, right? Or how Apple offers it. There is a trend that we want to do more stuff on our mobile devices, right? There is a trend that we expect more delivery, right? More personalization, more of a lot of things. And that is a trend, right? And so we'll take an example of how trends align and how we can leverage those. The second part of this is the customer journey. I find this as an invaluable tool of bringing your various business owners on the same page. When you look at mapping your customer journey across all touch points and you overlay that with systems, your gaps from a data strategy start to appear evident to everyone, right? They start to emerge. The areas of opportunity are clearer. And that gives rise to programs, projects, initiatives, things like that. And you look at a combination of trends in customer journey, and what also starts to emerge is all of these other CRM, data strategies, deficiencies, issues that need to be fixed for your company or for your customer. And those align really well with your product owners, people in delivery. This is kind of what will then give rise to user stories and use cases that your organization or your client's organization may need to address. So what we will do is kind of start opening up each of these components and getting into it. We are Velu, a 30-second commentary on this before we move forward.
I think we'll move on to the next topic. I think
Right.
The important piece is what does the trend mean? How does it work with customer journey and so on? So we certainly move to the next.
Cool. So the whole aspect of, and we'll share some of the links if my colleague hasn't already, where there is a recording, a 10-minute and a 5-minute recording of a trend in a customer journey. In the interest of time, we will not go through that, but there is a fair bit of detail here. And the intention is that, while we're talking about the overview here, you can definitely look at sort of a more in-depth view of what does this really mean, or what does the customer journey really mean. But the intention here is that when you talk about a CRM data strategy, you're trying to craft a narrative that is plain English and technical almost at the same time. For people who don't come from technical background, it is plain English enough where they go, okay, I get it, I understand. I see these challenges in my organization and I want to contribute in solving them. I can get behind this cause. And for people on the technology side, technologists like me, IT, sales, marketing, wherever those folks are, they obviously get it and they go, okay, yeah, we were saying this for 20 years, but we are glad that people are listening now. So we will look into some of these samples. And what you see is that there is a different audience for each one of these, right? The customer, this whole trend is really more aligned to senior management, but this is one piece that is universally applicable. The other part of this is what I find very interesting is regardless of the industry you are in, trends are sort of things that are affecting everyone. So you may be in healthcare like Velu, you may be in financial services, you may be selling B2B SaaS software, you may be in manufacturing. Trends affect everyone to varying degrees, but they do affect everyone with very few exceptions, like maybe public sector and government and those which are sort of more immune to it. For everyone else in the free market, trends have a significant impact. The second part of this is the customer journey, which we'll break further into. And that's kind of where you're looking at more from a business owner perspective. If I had marketing, sales, HR, finance, audit, compliance, legal, whatever department, I can look at a customer journey and start seeing here is where my department can be more strategic. And then we'll talk a little bit about challenges and data strategy and what that influences. Velu, any comments on this?
No, I think the important, this slide clearly connects the dots, right? So you have a trend, and then the trend is, where is it coming from? It's coming from your data, CRM data. That's where the trend is coming from. The customer journey is more of an education across the board. How does the customer, how many touch points you have from what departments in your company, and then certainly the data strategy in terms of the people who are responsible or own the data strategy. So we'll continue. So I'm good, Saurabh.
All right. So here is an example of a trend slide, and I have a video that we just shared a link of, and basically it elaborates on like our view of it, right? This is sort of our narrative. But what I find interesting about this is you could literally take this and the first 8 slides apply to almost every business, right? We live in a data economy, customer data fuels everything. Our relationship with data is changing. It is under fire from our perspective, right? Privacy fines are up, security breaches are up. It's eroding your brand value. Companies that understand this and think of privacy as a core value have really succeeded. Apple, all these brands have succeeded. And the pattern is customers expect us to be custodian of their data. This particular slide, I think it doesn't matter what business you are on, people would go, okay, yeah, sure. You can be in defense, you can be higher ed, you can be nonprofit, you can be public sector. Yeah, your customers expect you to be custodians of their data. And that gives you, the sort of managed customer data, how we have moved away from a Rolodex of first name, last name, phone number, email, to this sort of significantly larger dimensions of data that we are capturing. And here is an example of a trend.
So I thought I have something.
Sure.
If you look at this, right, we are in 2022. So the trend is your friend, right? So 20 years ago, when the business execs looking at their vision and the strategy for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years plan, okay, what was my sales growth for last year? And then let's increase by 10%. So you do have data. It's not that we did not have data 20 years ago, but if the data that we had were very narrow information, more like a sales data, but everything else we had to rely on external companies to help us to come up with the vision and the strategy. But fast forward in 2022, everything that is happening outside of your company also needs to be considered. And when you talk about CRM data strategy, you are connecting with the customer through social media, through various channels. And then the compliance and the laws are changing. So if you look at each slide is it gives you a good insight into how do we put a strategy or a vision or a business plan for you. You need to consider the trend. And CRM system gives you a really good indicator of, let's say you have a customer service Salesforce instance, and you have lots of complaints, and your sales system or sales CRM says that your trend has been declining for the last 10 years, or you plateaued your growth. So when you put your strategy, now can you imagine if you don't have a good CRM data, quality data, that will mislead the execs to come up with the wrong strategy. And then we execute against the wrong strategy. So this is where it is so critical that data in the CRM system should be so crystal clear that will give the confidence to the execs that I can trust the data. Now, when I come up with the strategy, let's say you're the CEO or the executive management, they can rely on that trend, look at the data and say, yep, this is how we are going to be operating for the next 3 years. So that's, to me, it's so critical, the CRM data. That's how I look at it, Saurabh.
True. And really the whole point of this trend is it needs to help answer this, right? Yeah. If you're a senior executive in a company, you're constantly recalibrating and making sure that is my vision, is my strategy in line with the world around me, right? So if you map a trend to your company's business vision or to your customer's business vision and strategy, you then help them validate and fine tune it, right? It's sort of a, these are supporting each other. We look at a trend and that hopefully aligns with their, vision and strategy. If it doesn't, they go, well, this doesn't make sense. We need to be more B2C. We need to be more subscription rather than transactional, whatever trend that they are looking at. And you're trying to constantly help align it. And this is the first level where, you're trying to have an agreement for your data strategy. We'll now take this a step further and see what this really drives into. So this is kind of my favorite tool in this arsenal. And, I've used this. I used to work at salesforce.org, and I've used some variant of it with higher ed customers, and, and you can basically create this for any industry, right? The whole idea here is that you map a customer journey across all touch points. And, this is for student experience, but it could be, a member in health insurance. It could be, a client for financial services. It could be a buyer for some hardware product or some e-commerce, business. Regardless of the kind of business you are in, this is sort of a very good framework that you can abstract and contextualize for your specific requirements, right? Every customer goes through this. They're seeking, they're looking at awareness. They're like looking for information. They go Google stuff. They look it up. Maybe, you have SEO, you have other things, you have a website, you have social media, amplifying all of this. And from there, they explore options. They make a decision. They sign up, you do this onboarding, you give them access, you provision stuff, you ship stuff, whatever your business is, you turn on their electricity, right? Whatever business you are in. And from there, they actually consume your product or service, and hopefully, they become a champion of your product and service, and you have a longer association. You take some.
I have a couple of things here, Saurabh.
Yeah.
See, I'm going back to the CRM systems, right? We are talking about, so CRM systems play a major role here. We all know that. But what I have noticed let's say, I'm a customer, I'm a B2B customer or a business customer, and I'm captured into the CRM system. So generally, a lot of conversation happens between the sales folks, marketing folks, and service folks when it comes to dealing with customers. But what about other departments who they are in touch with your customers? When I say your customers, I'm the salesperson and I am owning a relationship with the customer. But people who are from a different departments, how well are they communicating with your customers? These are high value, let's say whether it's a low value or high value, it doesn't matter. They are your customer. So when the other parts of your company communicating to your customers and that information is not captured in the CRM system, and that does affect your business. If the relationship between, let's say, finance department, a customer account receivable department, and the customer, if they don't go well, and that information is not captured in Salesforce or your CRM system, that you have a touch point, but the data is not stored in Salesforce, the communication, the collaboration. So that's, to me, it's also, by definition, you need to have a good design for your data strategy, CRM data, so that when the salesperson talks to the customer, other than my reps, customer service reps, marketing folks, there are other people in the company dealing with customers, and make sure that that information is captured in your CRM. That should be part of your design. So the journey is important, the touch point is important, but capturing the data into the CRM system so that it's all in one place is very critical.
Very well said. And that's kind of what these bars are, right? Like you put your Salesforce, your marketing cloud, your other systems. You may have a student information system for higher ed, or you may have, a customer master, some other kind of systems, EHR, EMR for healthcare. And that's the intention. Once you put this journey and you overlay it with systems, you start seeing where the gaps are. And it's not just you, it's all these business owners that want their group to contribute, right? So sales, service, marketing, all of those, they can now understand this is where the gap is. We really need to do a better job at this. So here is actually another example of this. This is for healthcare, right? Very similar idea. You have pre-care, patient care, post-care, broken down again into various aspects of it. And in this case, this is looking at a much broader, with a much broader lens. Like these are all the sort of value providers in our healthcare experience, right? You have hospitals, pharmacies, labs, so on and so forth. And all of this information is getting generated to Velu's earlier point, right? The kind of information that we want to capture, the category and classification of that data, right? Is it public, non-public? Is it sensitive information? Is it under HIPAA type regulations? And for that information, how would you protect it, right? What would your data strategy include in terms of data security, in terms of privacy by design? Do you mask sandboxes? Do you do retention? Do you address right to be forgotten requests? So on and so forth. So this is another example of, of how we articulate this out so that you now start to get more into data strategy. So we started with trend, into customer journey, and now into data strategy. And then it goes further down and you decompose it down to user stories. And, your projects are now looking at things more technical, more sort of data management constructs. Velu, any perspective or context on this?
I think it's a self-explanatory. So customer data needs to be safeguarded. It's very. So what we have seen so far, I know we are almost time. I'm just being respectful of the time. So as you see here, data strategy is not just data quality or data protection. So there is a lot more a lot of other components that you have to consider. So one of them is safeguard. Yep, I agree with you on what you have here, Saurabh. In the healthcare industry, for any industry, as a matter of fact, protecting your data is very important. So it certainly depicts well.
Cool. Well, and with that, really, I think if you think about it, the whole idea of CRM data strategy, and Velu said this, I put it on a slide because I so love it. CRM data strategy is a journey, right? And there is really no magic bullet. There is no software that will fix it for us. You can bring in seasoned help and consulting companies, but at the end of the day, an organization really needs to own it, internalize it, and have a buy-in so that they can see in the longer run how it aligns with their business vision and their strategy. And when you think about an effective CRM data strategy, it boils down into some key focus areas. And one of the reasons we wanted to highlight this in this talk is because, a lot of them are things that we talk about all the time, particularly people in technology, about data security, privacy by design, hygiene, customer preferences, managing opt-in, opt-outs. This is the part where I think we find a lot of challenges, and that's why we wanted to bring all of this together. Velu, I'm very curious if you want to add some commentary to it before I add the other 3 points.
I mean, these are the top areas that you would consider when you are looking at the data strategy. I'm talking about CRM data strategy. But is it all? No, I'm pretty sure every organization they have data principles of how do you design your data strategy. So I would love to hear from other folks here who are on the call. What do they consider other than what we see here? So I would like to hear from others.
Please unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment. We'd love to hear. But basically, just to kind of cap this up, right? Like if you think about strategy, it just, and doing a buy-in for it effectively, it starts by mapping a trend relevant to your business vision and strategy. We've shared a link. Please do, take a look at it. It has a lot more detail than what we discussed. And then you want to map your customer journey across all touch points. This is kind of really useful to collaborate with other stakeholders who may not otherwise be necessarily involved. And you leverage this across the board and help your stakeholders understand and buy into it and participate in a manner that adds more steam to your organization. All right, with that, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think an area that has been bouncing around in my head since you were talking about the number of CRM systems that fail. I think an important strategy area is like, what are we going to use the data to do? Just having it in one spot, right? Okay, there's some value there, I guess, if you think about the individual customer support rep that can see all the information, but really why do we need the data to be there? And I think that may be part of why, an easy answer to why CRMs have failed. So when you talked about, kind of just, went from tracking transactions to relationships to engagement. If it's just engagement, I don't want to say I'm a Salesforce employee, right? Just engagement. But like, if your HR system doesn't get implemented correctly, no one gets paid, right? If your billing system doesn't get implemented, money doesn't come in. If your sales CRM doesn't get adopted, salespeople use spreadsheets, right? People will find a way to make something like that work. And so I think a lot of that is if there's not in your strategy, there's not a real clear reason you're collecting the data and how you're going to use the data. And I think that does tie to the transformation idea, because we want to provide this transformative experience. Once the data becomes required for that experience, then there's no excuses, and there's no way it can fail. And what does the future look like where a CRM that's not up and running is as disastrous as an HR system that's not up and running? And I don't think we're there quite yet.
You know what, Jonathan, you brought a good point. If every product owner or a business owner, I hope nobody's listening from my company, should be accountable for, if you don't use the system the way it is supposed to be used, you are accountable. The metrics are not how much money you generate, how many opportunities you closed. It is I think some companies are already, not many companies are using the sales commission based off of your CRM data. Can you imagine if your sales commission is purely based on this, not the backend, your data warehousing system, Tableau CRM, completely a different system, financial system for your commission. If it is all going to be calculated based off of your CRM system, I think that's going to be a good motivation. Same thing with your customer service membership. Right? If you're serving your customer through CRM system, and if your metrics are not average call handling time, plus your NPS score and your all the loyalty and credibility, whatnot, that is measured within the CRM system, I think that will motivate people to have a good CRM strategy or the data strategy.
I love both those. Those are clear, like concrete examples of what the data is for, like how we're going to use it. So that's great examples.
Yeah, I agree. Jonathan, are there other areas that you've seen where customers struggle with, and we can do a better job in terms of buying and adoption of just the strategy, not the product, actually?
I think that this presentation did tee it up really well. I love the idea of using a trend that you can't argue with, because it does kind of help drive alignment. I think these are the big areas.
Okay.
Yeah, without getting down to without getting down to the weeds of like actual integration stuff, like this, I think is the big areas. Plus, I just think that there has to be where's the beef? Like, so what? Like, what are we doing with this data that we're collecting in the CRM that everyone gets behind?
Thank you, Jonathan. Maybe we should not. If anybody else has any points that we missed.
Yeah, please unmute yourself if there is any experience you want to share. I know Tushar Jansen.
This is Mukesh.
Did some points earlier. Hey, Mukesh.
Hey. One of the things that I wanted to also bring is, we're talking about the data strategy, why we want to do it, but there is another aspect to it is, once the data becomes stale, what do we do with that? Right, so we keep adding data, but never we clean up the data.
Really good point.
We never really have a strategy for cleaning up the data. So
Tushar, now full disclosure, we do data retention for Salesforce natively. I work with Salesforce customers that have like 15, 16, 17-year-old org. Nothing has ever been disposed. They have like 600, 700 million records. They're paying for Salesforce storage. Again, good for Salesforce. but from their perspective, they can definitely automate and reduce this. And one of the things that is now happening, will happen from 1st of January 23, is that the new version of California's privacy law, CPRA, has specific data retention regulatory requirements. So, before that, you could just hoard data and pay storage for it or whatever. But now, by law, you would, our customers would, and organizations would need to get rid of data that is, that's stayed there for a particular period. So you could have retention policies and you can justify why you need to keep it for 6 years or 8 years, but you can't really justify why you need to keep data for 17 years on X customers who are not even there. It's just a debt, right, in the organization that you're kind of carrying around. It's slowing everything down. Your sandbox refresh takes forever, masking takes forever. I work with customers all the time who have this problem. I'm so glad you brought it, because you're right. In typical data strategy, it is just, let's transform. But we don't really talk about the preventive maintenance of, getting old data out, obsolete data out of the system.
Yeah. And I think, Mukesh, you got a good point. But once again, all of us, include many companies, we take Tylenol. If there is a headache, we take Tylenol, fix the problem rather than fixing the process and the system. I think that's where it's a data strat. It's not a rocket science that we are talking about. It's a common sense that we all know. But do companies take this seriously? Do they spend enough time and enough resources to fix this issue? I think, in my opinion, with my experience, what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, companies are going in the direction. They realized it, especially in the CRM side. They are realizing it. They said, okay, we got to fix this. Everywhere, like look at, we need to clean up. Okay, great. We need to clean up and we need to back up. Yes, of course, we have to back up and restore when there is an issue. And then Salesforce, I don't want to say anything bad about Salesforce, but the more data that we have in Salesforce, who's the winner? Salesforce, we pay more money to them. The cost of ownership for the system is high. So we are fixing a component of a problem rather than looking at the whole process and the system, and ensure that we have a clear strategy. And as Jonathan said, like if you go to bank, you put your money, can you imagine that you lost 1 penny and the bank says, oh, I could not track a penny that you put $300, but I'm missing 1 penny. Come back to me tomorrow and I will figure out who holds your money. Has it ever happened? But why is the CRM system anything different than the bank account that you have? It should be treated, every CRM system should be treated as your bank account. Every data is equivalent to $1 or a penny or whatever that you want to call it. I think that's how I look at that. If you consider that your data is dollars and cents, I think that will drive your strategy.
True. Well put. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I wanted to, Tushar, you put some comments in the chat, and I'm wondering if you would, be okay with unmuting and just chatting about it.
Sure, but first, on this current trend that you're talking about, on one hand, I agree, data is like oil. You need to constantly refine it and make sure that it's fit for purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of the CPRA's mandate to delete data from a system, it's not worth cleaning up data after the fact unless you're looking to fix a relevant business problem. Now, under the CPRA, a business shall not retain a consumer's personal information for longer than is reasonably necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So we will, by default in California, have to come up with data retention and deletion practices.
Correct.
But let's presume we're not in the state of California. Then I would argue that for an old system, you only clean up data that is relevant. That's one thing. The second thing is, you keep harping on, excuse my language, but being privacy aware. Well, being privacy aware is table stakes now because of compliance. but compliance is the only driver of privacy right now. Brand reputation or value, in my experience, is a lagging driver. So the companies will go back to that so what. Think about how many consumers, yes, we have well-meaning privacy laws, but think about how many consumers will sign that 40-page agreement and sign up for Facebook and WhatsApp on their phones.
So, yeah, I think they're great points. I do want to make a slight, no observation on this. CPRA does not allow only to companies in California. CPRA applies to every organization that is doing business with Californians.
Correct.
So you may be in Oklahoma, but if you are selling actively to Californians and managing data of Californian residents, your organization is obligated by CPRA. So that's a much wider net across the United States because, hey, very few businesses don't do business with California.
And those laws are likely to be expanded across every jurisdiction, even local municipalities. Colorado has done it. A lot of other states, New York has done something.
True.
India is looking at it. So yeah, we serve customers in different jurisdictions and we store data. And then you talk about residency of the data. You talk about, where the people who are accessing this data are from, and there are all sorts of ways to slice and dice the pie. But the point is, the driver for privacy now is compliance.
Yep.
Well, yes.
I agree with you on that, Tushar. And another thing that as the light bulb goes off, that everything that we talk about, the CRM data strategy, the drivers are external. And because we have to be compliant. Okay, let's put a strategy together, make sure that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing versus if you want to get paid, make sure your data is clean. And then automatically a lot of things will, we may not even have a compliance issue. There may not even be a need for a loss because your data is so clean that you don't have to worry about all those things. Because when I say clean, you're protected and everything. So that's something that, certainly I don't know whether I can make the change, but I can certainly speak up.
But actually, I would add to this. The new thing that's happening, and I agree that compliance is an external driver. The internal change that's happening is because of things like DevOps, right? You want to do faster delivery. You're doing bi-weekly releases. I have worked with large Salesforce customers where a full copy refresh takes a week because they have 5, 6, 7 objects with like 600-700 million records each. That's a problem. They do a refresh once a year. And these are like companies with massively sophisticated technologies, right? Like they get it. Their technology people get it. This is not, a company with 4 developers. Like I'm talking very, very sophisticated Salesforce customers. But this is a challenge, right? Because you can't refresh it in time. It takes you 2.5, 3 weeks just to kind of refresh and prepare your sandbox. That's become the pebble in the shoe for DevOps. And we'll actually, that's probably one of the conversations I want to do, maybe later this month or next, because that is a key driver now for a lot of companies where, particularly Bay Area tech companies, they're like, I want this stuff to happen faster. Well, if you need to get rid of all this junk in your basement before, you can be nimble internally. So there are other drivers that are now, particularly with DevOps, that have become more evident.
Absolutely. And I wasn't diminishing the value of that. But then the other thing, Velu pointed out something which is very, very useful. When we say the data is clean, there are different levels of clean and different levels of relevance to data. So the important thing is have that documentation and say, use this data, it's good enough for this purpose, but don't use that same data for another purpose. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You say, yes, my data is at a bad, at a level where people don't seem to like it. Well, we can still use it for purpose X. We'll improve it for purpose Y. And that's where change management is key. Developers don't like doing this, but put a label on the data. Show people how to use it. When it's relevant, that will drive people putting more data into the system or using the system.
Tushar, you should come and have this conversation next time. Be one of the presenters. I want to talk about data classification in Salesforce. That's something that is a very underutilized feature of that platform. It is super compelling to do what you just described. I would, I work with some very, very, like sophisticated companies in the world, technologically speaking, and they are doing so much with data classification. Everybody else, I'm not aware if they're doing anything at all. It's such a phenomenal implication, right? Like we are starting to build this in our product. So now you can run retention policies based on data classification, right? The metadata tagging in Salesforce. So if you said on contact, a particular field is PII, right? And then you can have retention policies that are looking at that. Instead of saying delete everything that is more than 8 years old, you're saying, archive or delete or mask data that has these fields populated that are PII. So you can apply a lot of flexibility with this, which is it's a really interesting observation that you made of, like don't throw the baby out with the wash and I think that's kind of where metadata fits in.
Okay,
Thanks.
so it's a 401, Saurabh, and I respect everybody's time. So we want to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining us. As we discussed, we've shared a lot of these links, and do reach out to Velu or me on LinkedIn. Please do connect with us, and we'll share a copy of this recording. If you have any other questions on this, again, absolutely reach out to us on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get a hold of us. Velu, do you have any comments before we sign off here?
No, thank you for giving the opportunity, Saurabh. This is certainly a good topic, and I enjoyed it. And I thank everyone who asked the questions. Thank you for participating. And let's engage on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a great weekend.
Nice to meet you all. Bye. Thanks.
All right.